So I recently went through something I wouldn't wish on anyone. It started on an afternoon so ordinary, so peaceful that you'd never expect it to turn into the kind of nightmare that makes your stomach knot up every time you think back on it. I was sitting in my living room, half-eaten sandwich on my plate, when I noticed movement at the edge of my window. At first, I thought it was a delivery. Maybe Amazon dropping off a box. But when I stood and looked closer, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a delivery guy. It was the HOA president herself, Karen, striding up to my porch with the entitlement of a landlord checking on overdue rent. She didn't knock, she didn't even glance around like a normal neighbor might. No, she walked straight to my front door like she owned the deed, clipboard in one hand, a strange key in the other. Her jaw was tight, her lips pursed into that permanent sour expression that made her look like she'd been sucking on lemons all morning. Behind her lumbered Greg, her husband, arms crossed, smug grin on his face, the kind of man who thought intimidation was a personality trait. Then it happened. Karen shoved that key into my lock like she was trying to reclaim something stolen from her. The sound of metal scraping inside my front door sent a shock through me. I froze mid-bite, sandwich in hand, unable to believe what I was seeing. This wasn't about a fence or a garbage can. This wasn't about the height of my grass. This was something else. She rattled the key violently, twisting, forcing as if she could will it to open. Nothing. I watched confusion flash across her face, quickly replaced by rage. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Greg stepped closer, scowl replacing his smirk, looming like a storm cloud waiting to burst. I set my sandwich down. My appetite was gone. My patience was gone. You don't jam a key into a man's front door and call it a compliance check. You don't accuse a homeowner of being a squatter in his own house. But that's exactly what Karen did. She raised her phone, her voice suddenly dripping with the kind of fake panic that made me want to laugh. "Yes, I need police immediately," she told the dispatcher, every word calculated, every breath a performance. "There's a man inside this home. He's broken in. He's barricaded himself inside." She gave them my address. Greg pressed his face against my front window, staring straight at me, eyes narrowed like a predator spotting prey. He mouthed a word. I couldn't be certain, but it looked a lot like, "You're done." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't some random act of HOA overreach. This was targeted, planned. A setup designed to break me, humiliate me, and maybe even take my home. But Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. I let her finish her little stage play for the 911 operator. I wanted her to dig her hole as deep as possible. And when she finally tucked her phone away, certain that a SWAT team would storm my porch any second, I picked up my own phone. I didn't dial 911. I didn't need to. I had something better. See, I'm not a cop, not a lawyer. I'm a cybersecurity analyst. I spend my days building and breaking digital fortresses, seeing the systems other people miss. And because of that work, I've had contracts with law enforcement before, which meant I had the direct number to the dispatch supervisor. I called, my voice calm, steady, the way it gets when adrenaline sharpens everything into focus. I explained the situation, gave my name, gave Karen's name, described her attempt at unlawful entry and the fraudulent 911 call she had just made. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then a sigh. "Her again," the supervisor muttered. "We'll have a unit there in 2 minutes. Just stay inside and stay calm." Calm, that was my specialty. I sat on the stairs in my foyer, waiting, watching Karen pace my porch like a conquering queen, Greg cracking his knuckles beside her, both of them certain their performance was about to pay off. But what they didn't realize was that the show they had orchestrated, they weren't the stars. They were the clowns. 2 patrol cars rolled up, quiet and professional. No sirens, no lights. Karen lit up, pointing a triumphant finger at my front door. "He's in there," she cried. "The squatter." But instead of battering down my door, Officer Miller walked calmly up my steps. His eyes met mine when I opened the door. "Everything all right here, sir?" he asked, voice level. "Peachy," I said. "Just a little neighborhood welcome wagon." Behind him, I could already see Karen's smug smile curdling. Miller turned, his attention now squarely on her. "Ma'am, we need to have a word with you." For the first time since she arrived, Karen looked small. Her confidence cracked. Greg puffed his chest, tried to posture, but the second officer was already on him, unimpressed by the act. The real focus was on Karen, her fraudulent key, her false report, her lies unraveling in real time. And as I stood there, watching her righteous fury dissolve into panic, I knew this was just the opening act. Because when Karen's authority was challenged publicly, it didn't end there. It only made her dangerous. Everyone in that neighborhood heard the sound of Karen's voice cracking under the weight of her own lies. But if you think being publicly called out by the police stopped her, you don't know Karen. Her look that afternoon told me everything, pure venom in her eyes, a silent promise that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The week after the key fiasco was eerily quiet. Too quiet. No yellow violation slips tucked under my doormat, no Greg parking across the street to watch me like a hawk. Not even Karen's midnight patrols with her reflective vest and clipboard. At first I thought maybe I had won. Maybe the humiliation had been too much for her and she'd finally back off, but deep down I knew better. Quiet wasn't peace. Quiet was the pause before the storm. That storm broke with the thud of a certified letter against my door. The envelope was thick, official-looking, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside, a bill, not for trash, not for grass. No, this one was for $2,500, a so-called special assessment fee for community landscape enhancement. No explanation of what that enhancement was. No details, just a deadline. Pay within 30 days or face penalties. And of course, it was signed by Karen herself. Tucked behind the bill was a second page, a tidy list of every supposed infraction I'd ever had. The garbage cans, the tree branch, the mailbox, except something was different. Each fine had been retroactively inflated. That $25 garbage can fine, now $250. The $50 tree branch fine, now $500. They had ballooned a handful of petty charges into a mountain of debt. My new total, just over $3,000. I remember standing in my kitchen, letter trembling in my hands, fury building in my chest. This wasn't about landscaping. This was about power. Karen had failed to break me with a fake key. Now she was trying to bleed me dry with paper and ink. I called Alex, my best friend. He listened quietly, and when I asked if this was even legal, he gave me the answer I already feared. Legally, it's murky. HOAs can put liens on houses. That's their stick. If you don't pay, they can cloud your title. You won't be able to sell or refinance until you give in. I paced my kitchen, shaking my head. So what? I hire a lawyer, spend thousands to fight thousands. That's exactly what she wants. It's extortion, Alex. He sighed. I know, but you need to be careful. These people, they can ruin you. That night I couldn't sleep. My quiet little house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a battlefield. And sure enough, Karen wasn't done. The next morning, a bright yellow notice was taped to my door, non-compliant welcome mat. The mat was plain brown, just brown. The next day, another notice, this one tied to my garden hose, improperly stowed equipment. I had coiled it neatly by the spigot. Then came one on my car windshield, non-standard tire shine. I don't even use tire shine. Each ridiculous violation carried another fine. $100, $200, over and over. And while I never saw who delivered them, I knew it was Greg. I could feel his eyes on me from across the street, that smug, silent intimidation. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was psychological warfare. When I tried talking to neighbors, most wouldn't even look me in the eye. They'd give a nervous smile and hurry inside. Karen and Greg had ruled this place for years, and fear had settled deep into the bones of the community. Finally, one man, David, who lived 2 doors down, leaned in close and whispered, "Just pay it. It's not worth the fight." His eyes darted nervously around, like even speaking to me was a risk. I asked him what happened. His answer chilled me. "I had a political sign once, a little one. They fined me every day until I took it down, cost me nearly $1,000. They even threatened foreclosure." That word, foreclosure, echoed in my head long after David scurried back inside. And sure enough, a week later, another certified letter landed in my mailbox. This one wasn't from Karen. It was from an attorney's office, a notice of intent to file lien. If I didn't pay the nearly $4,000 they now claimed I owed within 15 days, they would move forward with foreclosure proceedings. This was the kill shot. They weren't trying to discipline me anymore. They were trying to take my home. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter, anger pounding in my veins. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd cave like every other neighbor before me. But what they didn't understand is that I wasn't wired that way. I wanted peace, but when peace was stolen from me, I didn't cower, I fought back. And that night, for the first time since moving here, I didn't see my home as just a house. I saw it as a fortress, and every war, no matter how small or suburban, is won with strategy. So if Karen wanted a war, I was ready to give her one. It's funny how quickly a home can stop feeling like a sanctuary and start feeling like a target. After that Leon notice, every sound outside my window felt sinister, every shadow across the street suspicious. And when you're up against someone like Karen, silence isn't peace, it's strategy. I knew if I wanted to survive this, I couldn't just react. I had to get ahead of her. Wars aren't won with rage, they're won with information. So I began to build my fortress. Every letter, every notice, every certified mail slip, I scanned them, cataloged them, backed them up on a secure cloud server, triple encrypted. I started keeping a log. The time Greg's truck idled outside my house. The hour Karen walked past with her clipboard. Even the flicker of a motion light in my yard at midnight. Everything went into the record. Documentation wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was ammunition. But defense alone wouldn't be enough. I needed eyes everywhere, so I upgraded, not just a doorbell cam. I installed high-definition night vision cameras at every corner of my property, covering every inch of my lawn and the street beyond. I wired audio recorders inside my windows. If Karen came back screaming on my porch, I wanted her voice crisp, undeniable, legal, admissible. Because the truth was simple. Karen had power, but she abused it in the dark. My only chance was to drag that abuse into the light. And sure enough, the absurd violations didn't stop. One morning, I found a yellow tag nailed to my oak tree. The violation? Excessive leaf drop. They fined me $200 because my tree was being a tree. It would have been laughable if it weren't so vicious. Then Greg's intimidation started getting bolder. He began parking his oversized truck across from my house for hours at a time, just sitting there, staring. One evening, I walked out with the trash. He stepped out of his truck, cracking his knuckles, standing 10 feet away in silence. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The message was clear. I called Alex again, my voice low with frustration. He listened carefully, then let out a long sigh. "This is escalating, man. Greg sounds unhinged. Maybe just pay the fines. It's a few thousand. It's not worth getting hurt." I almost laughed. "It's not about the money, Alex. If I pay, they win. And then they'll do it to the next person. Someone has to stop them." I could hear his hesitation on the line. He wanted to protect me, but he also knew I wasn't going to back down. Finally, he just said, "Then watch your back." I did, and what I saw changed everything. Through public records, I started pulling every document tied to our HOA, the articles of incorporation, the annual reports. The finances were a mess. Vague expenses listed in the tens of thousands. Community maintenance, $50,000. Administrative services, $30,000. No breakdowns, no receipts, just black holes where money disappeared. And then the board list caught my eye. President, Karen. Vice President of Security, Greg. Treasurer, Brenda, Karen's sister. It wasn't a community board, it was a family business. That was when I started going door to door, trying again to talk to neighbors. Most still shut me down, fear in their eyes, but one elderly woman who'd lived here for decades finally cracked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There's an approved vendor list. It's not written down, but it's real. If you use Karen's cousin for fencing, your fence passes inspection. If you don't, it fails, every time." Her words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just petty harassment. It was a racket, a kickback scheme. They weren't just abusing their power, they were profiting from it. And then one night the cameras caught something I'll never forget. Greg pulled up to his usual spot. But this time another car rolled up behind him, a beat-up contractor van. A man got out, walked to Greg's window and handed him a thick white envelope. Greg glanced inside, nodded, then handed the man a paper. A work order, an invoice, something. I had it all on video. It was the first real crack in their armor. I rewound the footage a dozen times, zooming in on the van's logo, Precision Paving. A quick search told me what I needed to know: horrible reviews, lawsuits, and the kicker: the owner was Greg's brother-in-law. It all snapped into place. Karen declared violations, Greg enforced them, and their relatives swooped in with overpriced repairs. It was organized corruption hiding behind HOA bylaws. But I wasn't just uncovering fraud. I was uncovering something far darker. Because a week later, the cameras recorded another meeting, Greg leaning against his truck, another contractor beside him. This time, the audio mic picked up their voices. "Yeah, the old lady at number 82 is next," Greg said. "Karen's already got the paperwork drawn up. We hit her with the roofing violation Monday." Number 82, Mrs. Gable, a sweet widow in her 80s who had lived here her entire life. They were coming for her. And then came the sentence that turned my blood to ice. The contractor hesitated. "You sure? After what happened with that Henderson guy, I'm still spooked." Henderson, that name punched the air out of me, because Henderson wasn't just anyone. Henderson was Alex's last name, his father's last name. The man who'd lost his house here years ago, supposedly from bad investments. The man whose shame had haunted Alex's family ever since. And in that moment I knew. Karen and Greg hadn't just targeted me. They had destroyed Alex's father, and they were about to destroy Mrs. Gable. Which meant this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. When I told Alex what I'd overheard, the phone went silent. I could hear nothing but his breathing, shallow and sharp. Finally, he whispered, "That's my dad. They're talking about my dad." His voice cracked, and in that moment I realized the truth was worse than either of us had imagined. His father hadn't lost his house because of bad luck or bad investments. He'd lost it because Karen and Greg had perfected their little scheme on him. He was their prototype, their test run. Alex showed up at my place an hour later. He didn't knock. He just walked in, eyes red, jaw tight. I didn't say a word. I simply opened the file I'd found, the one buried deep in Karen's laptop backups, Henderson Property, PDF. It was all there, fake engineering reports claiming foundation cracks, fraudulent fines, letters from their lawyer, foreclosure notices. His father's downfall documented like a lab experiment. Alex stood over my shoulder reading in silence. His fists trembled. A single tear slid down his cheek. Then he muttered, "Prototype. They actually called it prototype." He said the word like it was poison. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about fines or bylaws anymore. It wasn't even about Mrs. Gable. This was about vengeance. This was about justice. I told Alex my plan. It wasn't simple, it wasn't clean, and it wasn't legal. But it was the only way to tear them down completely. Karen runs this whole operation from her laptop, I explained. The real books, the real communications, they're all in there. If I can get access, we'll have everything. Video of envelopes is good, but digital records, that's a confession. Alex hesitated. He was a teacher, a believer in systems, in rules. "That's hacking," he said slowly. "Isn't that illegal?" I met his eyes. "What they did to your father was illegal. What they're planning to do to Mrs. Gable is illegal. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. We're not doing this for revenge. We're doing it to stop them for good." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded, resolve hardening in his expression. "What do you need me to do?" The plan was simple in theory, risky in execution. I needed to get within range of Karen's Wi-Fi to breach her system. That meant staging from her neighbor's house, Mrs. Gable. But first, we had to tell her the truth. The next morning, we knocked on her door. She looked so small standing there, fragile in her cardigan, but her eyes were sharp. When we told her what we'd uncovered, showing her the footage, the files, her lips pressed into a firm line. She trembled, yes, but she didn't waver. "My roof is just fine," she said, "and I'll be damned if I let that woman steal my home." When we asked if I could set up in her spare room, the one facing Karen's house, she didn't hesitate. "Do whatever you have to do, boys." We had our staging ground. Now we needed a distraction, and for that there was only one man I could call, Uncle Mike. "Uncle Mike," I said over the phone, "I need something big, loud, tacky, something to keep Karen and Greg looking out their front window for at least an hour. There was a long pause, then his voice erupted with glee. "Son, I've been waiting my whole life for this. I've got an army of gnomes that are ready for deployment." It was ridiculous, it was insane, it was perfect. The next day at 2 p.m. sharp, a beat-up van with Mike's Merry Garden statues painted on the side screeched to a stop in front of Karen's pristine lawn. Out stepped Uncle Mike in full safari gear, pith helmet and all. With great ceremony he began unloading gnomes, fishing gnomes, sleeping gnomes, gnomes riding squirrels. He lined them up in battle formation across Karen's yard. Right on cue, Karen and Greg stormed out, screeching at him. The shouting echoed down the block. Greg's face turned crimson. Karen's arms flailed as she shrieked about trespassing and property values. And inside Mrs. Gable's spare room, I was hunched over my laptop, antenna pointed at Karen's house. Her Wi-Fi appeared on my screen, HOA President 1. That was her password. The arrogance was breathtaking. I was in. Her laptop was like an open book, no firewall, no protection. And there it was, her entire digital life. Emails, documents, spreadsheets. I started the transfer, watching the progress bar crawl forward agonizingly slowly. Outside, Uncle Mike was giving a full-blown speech through a bullhorn about gnome rights. The absurdity almost made me laugh, but my heart was hammering. The progress bar ticked past 50%, then 70%. And that was when I heard the wail of a siren. Someone had called the cops on Uncle Mike. I froze. The officer's voice carried from the street as he tried to calm Karen down, tried to quiet Uncle Mike's gnome protest. The distraction was spiraling out of control. But worse, the mic on my laptop picked up Greg's voice, low and sharp. "Something's not right. This is too weird. It's a diversion." My blood ran cold. Greg's heavy footsteps crunched on the pavement, moving away from the chaos, moving toward the side of the house, moving toward me. 90%, 95, the download wasn't finished, but Greg was seconds away from finding me. And I had to decide, sever the connection now and hope it was enough, or risk everything for the last piece of evidence. I held my breath, watching the bar crawl forward, praying I hadn't pushed my luck too far. Greg's footsteps crunched closer, each one heavier than the last, like a countdown to disaster. 96%. 97. I ducked below the window, my pulse hammering so hard I thought he'd hear it. Mrs. Gable let out a frightened gasp from the living room. 99. And then done. The transfer completed just as Greg's shadow passed across the window. I yanked the cable from my laptop, shoved it into my bag, and bolted out of the spare room. I tore through the kitchen, swung open the front door, and slipped into the chaos outside. No one even noticed me. The cop was busy wrangling Uncle Mike, who was still delivering a fiery sermon about gnome civil rights. Karen was shrieking like a banshee. Neighbors had come out of their houses to gawk at the circus unfolding on her lawn. And I was just one more face in the crowd, backpack heavy with digital dynamite. That night, alone in my office, I opened the files, and what I saw turned my stomach. The folder wasn't just receipts or kickbacks. It was called acquisitions. Inside were property records, foreclosure notices, quitclaim deeds, file after file, each one tied to a family in this neighborhood. Elderly couples, widows, people living alone. Karen and Greg had been running a predatory system for years. They would bury a homeowner in fraudulent fines, inflate penalties until the debt was crushing, then use their lawyer to file liens. When foreclosure inevitably followed, their shell company, Neighborhood Enhancement Services, run by Brenda, Karen's sister, would swoop in and buy the homes at auction for pennies. It wasn't just greed, it was theft, systemic and deliberate. But buried deeper was the file that made me physically ill, a subfolder older than the rest labeled prototype, and inside it, Henderson Property, PDF. I clicked it open. It was Alex's father's case. Every fraudulent report, every fine, every threatening letter. They had documented the entire destruction of his family's life as if it were a scientific experiment. They hadn't just ruined him. They had used him as a test subject. I called Alex immediately, my voice shaking with rage. "You need to see this." He showed up minutes later. I didn't say a word. I just turned the monitor toward him. He read silently, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with something darker than anger. When he reached the last page, he whispered, "They called it prototype." That one word broke something in him. His father's shame, the years of confusion, it all snapped into focus. This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't failure. It was Karen and Greg. They had stolen his father's dignity, his home, his peace. Alex looked at me then, and I knew there was no going back. "We're taking them down," he said, his voice cold and steady. The files weren't just damning, they were overwhelming. Not only kickbacks and embezzlement, but evidence of racketeering, predatory foreclosure, fraud. This was organized crime hiding behind an HOA letterhead. And their next target was already chosen, Mrs. Gable. Her roofing violation was scheduled to be delivered on Monday. We had days, maybe less. But then I found something else, something that shifted the entire battle. A calendar invite in Karen's email, 2 days away, the annual HOA meeting, the agenda, a vote on a special assessment for critical infrastructure repairs. Each homeowner would be forced to pay thousands, a massive cash grab disguised as maintenance. It was their end game. And suddenly, I knew what we had to do. "We expose them at the meeting," I told Alex. "Not just to the cops, not just in court, to everyone in front of their victims. We make it public. We humiliate them the same way they humiliated your dad." Alex stared at the screen, then nodded slowly. "Burn them down," he whispered. The plan came together quickly. I had a contact at a local investigative news station. I called him, gave him the time and place, told him to bring a camera. Then I sent an anonymous package of the worst evidence. The True Ledger, the Henderson file, the acquisitions folder, to the state attorney general's office. Enough to trigger interest, but not enough for them to swoop in too early. The stage was set, the trap was baited. But there was one more problem. As I combed through Greg's financials, I found receipts from his so-called security company. Night vision gear, surveillance tools, and most alarming, a registered firearm purchase. Greg wasn't just a bully with a clipboard, he was armed, and desperate men with guns don't go quietly. The HOA meeting wasn't just going to be a public shamming, it was going to be dangerous. 2 days, that was all we had. 2 days to prepare for a showdown that could either free this neighborhood or bury us with it. The 2 days leading up to the HOA meeting felt like waiting for a storm you could see forming on the horizon. Every second ticked by heavier than the last. I barely slept, not from fear but from the burning weight of preparation. The evidence was ready. The projector was hidden in my bag. The reporter had confirmed he'd be there, camera in hand. And the Attorney General's office had promised to observe with interest. That was bureaucratic code for, "We'll be watching. Don't screw this up." But I couldn't shake the gnawing thought of Greg's new toys, the night vision gear, the weapon. A man like him, cornered and desperate, wasn't just dangerous. He was unpredictable. The night before the meeting, Alex sat at my kitchen table, staring at a picture of his father on his phone. His hands trembled as he set it down. They stole everything from him, his home, his pride, his peace. Tomorrow we take it all back. I nodded, but my chest felt tight, not because of doubt, but because of the stakes. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't even just about Alex. It was about every neighbor too afraid to speak, every family who had lost their home. Tomorrow wasn't just a meeting. It was an execution, and Karen and Greg didn't even know they were the ones walking to the gallows. The morning of the showdown dawned heavy with humidity, the kind of air that clings to your skin like a warning. The community hall buzzed with low chatter as residents filed in. Stale coffee steamed on a table in the back. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of nervous bodies. Karen stood at the front like a queen addressing her court, beaming with manufactured warmth, gavel in hand. Greg loomed by the door, arms crossed, scanning the room like a nightclub bouncer. They were confident, too confident. Alex and I slipped into the back row. He was wound tight, a coiled spring ready to snap. I leaned close and whispered, "Breathe. Let them hang themselves." Mrs. Gable sat in the front row, looking small, fragile, but defiant. Her very presence was a statement. I will not be their victim. The meeting began with the usual theater. Approval of minutes. petty debates about mailbox paint. Karen thrived in the monotony, her voice smooth and commanding. Every bang of her gavel was a performance. And then she shifted to the main event. "We must now address the urgent matter of critical infrastructure," she announced, lifting a stack of papers high. "Certified reports reveal crumbling foundations and failing roofs. For the safety of our community, I am proposing a special assessment of $5,000 per household." Gasps rippled through the room. $5,000. It was theft wrapped in official language. Karen's eyes glittered with triumph as she scanned the shocked faces. That was our cue. I had already sabotaged the hall's aging projector earlier with a coffee accident, forcing them to rely on the sleek backup I'd brought along. As Karen prepared to display her fraudulent reports, Alex moved calmly to the front. "Technical difficulties," he murmured, switching cables. He plugged in my laptop. The screen behind Karen flickered, but it wasn't her slides that appeared. It was the ledger, the true ledger. The room went silent. Row after row of numbers glowed on the wall, undeniable evidence of a decade of theft. Tens of thousands funneled into Brenda's shell company. Neighbors craned their necks, whispering, gasping. I rose slowly from my chair. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the silence. "Would you like to explain these numbers? This is the budget you don't show the homeowners, isn't it?" Her face went from pink to white to blotchy red in seconds. "This is fabricated," she spat. "It's slander." But the dam had cracked. A man in the crowd pointed, voice trembling with anger. "Look at landscaping. I paid thousands for my yard. Where did the money go?" Another neighbor stood. "That's where my fees went, to her sister's company." The murmur of outrage swelled into a roar. Fear that had silenced them for years evaporated in an instant. The neighbors weren't sheep anymore. They were wolves, and Karen was the one cornered. Greg shifted at the door, his eyes locked on me. He pushed off the wall, his jaw clenched. But for the first time, people weren't looking at me with suspicion. They were looking at him with fury. I clicked to the next slide. The acquisitions folder opened, and there, projected for all to see, was Henderson Property, PDF. Alex stepped forward, his voice steady, resonant. "That's my father. You didn't just steal our money, you stole his home, his life, his dignity." He turned and pointed at Mrs. Gable. "And she was your next target." The room exploded. Neighbors were on their feet, shouting, demanding answers. Karen's lips trembled as she tried to regain control, but her voice was drowned out by years of pent-up rage unleashed all at once. And that was when the doors at the back swung open. A reporter walked in, camera rolling, lens trained directly on Karen's horrified face. Behind him came two men in plain clothes, badges flashing. Investigators from the Attorney General's office. The timing was perfect. The trap had sprung. And Karen, for the first time, she looked afraid. The air in the community hall crackled like a live wire. The crowd's fury had boiled over, neighbors shouting, demanding explanations, years of bottled-up resentment erupting all at once. And standing in the middle of it all was Karen, her face pale, her hands trembling, her gavel useless in her grip. But Greg, he wasn't pale, he wasn't trembling. His face twisted with rage, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. He was a man watching his empire crumble, and he wasn't going down quietly. One of the investigators stepped forward, badge glinting in the fluorescent light. "Karen and Greg Miller," he said firmly, "you need to come with us." Karen froze, mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. For once, words failed her. Greg, though, reacted with violence. With a guttural yell, he lunged, not at the investigators, not even at Karen. At me. His massive frame tore through the aisle, knocking chairs aside, scattering terrified neighbors. His eyes locked on me with murderous intent, the kind of fury that made you believe he was capable of anything. Time slowed. I braced myself, heart slamming against my ribs, but before he could reach me, something unexpected happened. David, the quiet man from 2 doors down, the one who had whispered warnings to me weeks earlier, stuck out his leg. Greg, blinded by rage, didn't see it. His foot caught, his momentum betrayed him. He went sprawling face first onto the linoleum floor with a sickening thud. The room gasped, then erupted. The investigators pounced, wrenching his arms behind his back, cuffing him as he thrashed and cursed. Years of intimidation, years of smug smirks and silent threats, all of it reduced to a man writhing on the ground, powerless. And Karen, she collapsed into a chair, sobbing, her gavel clattering to the floor. When the second investigator approached, she didn't fight. She just held out her wrists, tears streaking her cheeks, as if she already knew the game was over. But the humiliation wasn't done. The reporter's camera was rolling the whole time, capturing every second. Karen's sobbing face, Greg's pathetic collapse, the neighbor's outrage. It wasn't just evidence, it was theater. The fall of a suburban dictatorship live on tape. As they were led out of the hall in handcuffs, the room erupted, not with fear this time, but with applause. Neighbors clapped, some cheered, some cried. For the first time in years, they weren't looking at Karen and Greg with dread. They were looking at them with relief, with victory. I sank into a chair, my chest heaving, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Alex sat beside me, silent, his face pale but resolute. He had watched his father's legacy destroyed in silence. Now he was watching justice unfold in public. He reached out, gripped my shoulder, and whispered, "We did it." But even as the investigators hauled Karen and Greg away, I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because justice isn't just about arrests, it's about repair. The neighbors gathered in clusters, talking, some angry, some relieved. Mrs. Gable shuffled toward us, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "You boys saved my home," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Her frail frame shook, but her voice was steady. "I thought I'd die in that house, not be forced out of it. Thank you." Her words pierced deeper than any cheer. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about protection. The investigators promised more arrests, more charges, more digging. "What you found," one of them told me quietly, "goes far beyond this neighborhood. This is bigger than anyone realized." And maybe it was. But as I watched Karen shoved into the back of a squad car, her once perfect hair disheveled, her face streaked with tears, I realized something. The war was over. The tyrants had fallen, and the neighborhood was free. But victories, even righteous ones, don't come without scars. Because in the chaos and the noise, I'd seen something in Greg's eyes as he was dragged out, a promise. He wasn't just beaten, he was broken, and broken men are dangerous. The legal fight would drag on for months, maybe years. But at least for tonight, for the first time since I moved here, I could breathe. Justice had begun. 6 months later, I sat on my porch with a glass of lemonade in hand, watching the sun slant through the branches of my oak tree. The air was quiet, calm, the kind of peace I had moved here for. Except now, that peace wasn't fragile. It was earned. The neighborhood had changed. You could feel it in the way people waved, in the way kids biked freely down the street without their parents glancing nervously at Karen's house. For years, fear had been the wallpaper of this community. But once the queen and her enforcer were toppled, the walls came down. People spoke. People helped each other. It was a neighborhood again. The HOA board had been dissolved, its assets frozen by the state. A new board was formed, led by neighbors who actually cared. David, the same man who once whispered to me in fear, was elected president. He stood taller now, his voice steady. At their first meeting, he did something symbolic. He tossed the old 300-page bylaw book into a fire pit and let it burn. The neighbors cheered, laughing as the smoke curled upward. For the first time, bylaws didn't feel like chains. They felt like ashes. Karen and Greg, meanwhile, weren't so lucky. Faced with mountains of digital evidence, they took a plea deal. Fraud, racketeering, embezzlement. They were sentenced to prison, their assets liquidated to repay the homeowners they had bled dry. It wasn't just accountability, it was poetic justice. The people they had extorted were now reclaiming what was theirs. And Mrs. Gable? She kept her house. More than that, the Attorney General's task force helped undo the damage Karen and Greg had inflicted for years. 4 other families who had lost their homes under the program got them back or received fair settlements. Watching those people return to their doorsteps, keys in hand, was like watching ghosts come back to life. But the greatest victory belonged to Alex. The file-labeled prototype had been more than evidence. It had been a blueprint of his father's destruction. But because of it, the state returned his family's old home to him. When he walked through the front door, his eyes welled up with tears. The walls were scarred, the garden overgrown, but it was his again. The first thing he did was plant flowers in the yard, the garden his father had always dreamed of. I visited him the day he planted the last row. He stood with dirt on his hands, sweat on his brow, but a peace in his eyes I hadn't seen since the beginning. "It's more than just a house," he told me quietly. "It's my dad's honor. We got it back." That's when I realized justice isn't only about punishment. It's about restoration, about making the broken whole again. One evening, as the last of summer's heat gave way to dusk, I found a small package on my porch. No return address, just a scribbled note inside. From Uncle Mike. The box held a single garden gnome, this one wearing a superhero cape and holding a tiny laptop. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. Maybe Uncle Mike wasn't so crazy after all. I set it by the steps of my porch, a little sentinel watching over the peace I had fought for. Looking back, I never asked for this war. I bought a house in search of quiet to escape the noise of my life. Instead, I found myself in the middle of a battlefield I didn't choose. But sometimes, the battles we don't choose are the ones that define us. Karen thought she owned this neighborhood. Greg thought he could scare it into submission. But in the end, all their power crumbled under the weight of truth. And here's the thing I've learned. The strongest walls aren't built with concrete or bylaws. They're built with people, with neighbors who finally stop whispering and start standing together. Now when I close my front door, the same one Karen once tried to unlock with her fake key, I don't hear threats. I don't feel fear, I just feel home. Because in the end, justice wasn't just about taking them down. It was about lifting everyone else up. And that, more than any fine, more than any file, is what real victory looks like. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.